All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Darren Merkins. With me is CEO of Gunner Technology, Cody Swan. What's going on, Cody?
Not much, just closing out some apps so my laptop doesn't catch fire.
What are you rolling with these days, laptop-wise? That MacBook Pro?
Yeah, that MacBook Pro, which the one that's has this stupid touchpad. You know, it's like 2 years old now, 2 or 3 years old now. It was the first one with a touchpad where basically the keyboard is like defective half the time. So most of the time you have to use like an external keyboard with it, which is just fantastic.
That's sweet. That's pretty nice.
We
Didn't they get rid of the touchpad? Didn't they go back to old school? Or is the touchpad still around?
I think it's still around because Apple was 100% into that. And, you know, this is what we keep saying. Like, I used to love Apple so much. And, like, because everything was just so tight and it just worked. But now, not only does it not just work, but it's increasingly more and more expensive. And, like, definitely not cheap. But I'm also value conscious. And,
yeah,
you know, it's just the one thing where we said this before on other shows that really gets you is, in order to do iPhone development, you have to have a Mac to do iPhone development. And, you know, when you're a software development company, you need to be producing iPhone apps, which means you're going to have a Mac.
I wonder if that's why they're fighting so hard against PWAs and dragging their feet with Safari support for PWA features. Because they sort of see the writing on the wall if they you know, open the device up to PWAs more.
Yeah, it certainly, I mean, because we talked about this before, most apps now are free on the App Store, and then they're kind of like take payment within the app. So I don't think that that's as much of a loss of revenue for Apple as what you're saying is basically like they may really lose their foothold in the development market with the development machines if they throw their full weight behind PWAs.
Yeah, it's tough. It'll be interesting too because there's actually court cases now. I think one's actually on its way up to the Supreme Court about the App Store and whether that qualifies as, I think it's actually a monopoly case, but I can't remember exactly what the I guess what the, not legislation, but whatever their crime is for the App Store having complete control over the entire ecosystem. So
it's weird.
If that, yeah.
Like, because we got bit in the worst way with uConsent, where Apple just decided one day for no reason to blackball the app, and there's nothing we can do about it. And it's frustrating. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it was their success. You know what I'm saying? Like, they built the App Store. Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's frustrating. But I'm of the opinion they should be able to do whatever they want with it. It's theirs, right? Like, I mean, just because they had success and now they're the de facto place to host apps. I mean, you know, you kind of like can fight against the system, but whenever you do that, you're going to have a tougher time. So, like, it's frustrating, but I don't think anyone should be able to file them. I don't think they're a monopoly or should be penalized as such.
TBD. I was like fighting the power, so we'll see what happens. I actually, at the opening, forgot to wear my Country Shore hat. So that's a perfect segue into the Country Shore giveaway. Country Shore is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countryshoreoutfitters.com. They're our sponsors for this week's episode. We actually have a Country Shore giveaway going on our Facebook page, which you can sign up for. And the winner this week is Alice J. from Richmond, Virginia. So, Alice, you have a Country Shore hat heading your way along with copies of our ebooks. So enjoy those. And anyone who didn't win this week, make sure to sign up for next week's Country Shore giveaway on our Facebook page. And while you're there, you can answer our question of the week, which this week coming up is actually, you do the past week first, right? I'm new to this. This is only my second week doing the question of the week. So
the question of the week that just passed, and then we preview the week ahead.
Okay. So see, Cody Swan is the seasoned veteran of the question of the week. So this past week, the question was, is actually apropos to what we were just talking about. So would you spend $1,000 or more on a phone? And 75% of people said no, they wouldn't. So that's probably bad news for Apple. And it actually seems to be what the general populace is saying about $1,000 plus phones, that they don't want to spend that much on a smartphone.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, we should do a tech in 2 minutes about this. I was reading about that Apple really is kind of worried about revenue. So they're looking for new streams of revenue. So they're trying to create a news service where it's like Spotify. And so their users pay like $20 a month or whatever. And then
Do
they
they
get
have different bands sing you the news?
pretty much. And my favorite is Kenny Loggins. He does a mean Bloomberg.
I would actually sign up for that if Kenny Loggins sang me the news.
But anyway, so like there's outrage now because I don't know if you know how Spotify works, but they pay more to the bands that get played more often. So Apple would give more money to the news that is read more often, or the news outlets that are read more often. But Apple's basically saying we're going to take 50% of the revenue, and then we're going to throw you the scraps.
Well, that's like Spotify. Spotify, the artists get paid pennies on the dollar.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So,
you know, my favorite anecdote, though, of getting paid more the more you get listened to is a band called, I'm going to blank on the name. I'll look it up and I'll mention it on stream because they are worth a listen. They're a rockin' band. But they were trying to fund a tour. So what they did was they released an 8-hour track of silence called Night Tunes or something like that, and they would just have their fans play it as when they went to sleep.
That is incredible.
So they ended up getting like a couple $100,000 from Spotify before Spotify was like, wait a minute, we're not going to pay you to play silence. And then there was such an uproar about it that Spotify was like, fine, we'll pay you a couple $100,000 for your fans to play silence, but we're cutting this off now.
Oh my gosh.
That was a brilliant way to game the system.
That is amazing.
Oh man, now I need to look up the name of that band. While we talk about next week's question of the week. Next week's question of the week is actually, I saw a couple articles this week about cameras that were being released. Canon has a new EOS that's like some super fancy camera. It's only $1,300, but I think that's actually relatively cheap for a really nice camera. And the name of the band is Vulfpeck. VULFPECK.
I was just looking that up. Yep.
So give them a listen. And there was another company. It wasn't one of the major ones, but they're releasing a 4K camera for $800. So my question was, do you own a camera? And with parentheses, like a camera, like an actual, it can be digital, but an old school lens camera.
Yeah, I actually own 2 DSLRs. I'm not sure how. Well, that's not true. So back when I was, this is dating me. When I first got into, when I was still like journalism, I was like one of the first people in the journalistic ilk who was like, oh my gosh, like I can cut out so much stuff if I just go directly online. And I would do so in the capacity of my employer. But I didn't have to call for a photographer. I didn't have to call for a videographer. I could publish like my recordings with sources digitally. So I bought a DSLR camera, and everywhere I went, I would add digital galleries to all my stories, which was like a new thing. So I still have that DSL camera.
Yeah, that's the thing. I still, when I was an intern at ESPN, I put my meager earnings towards buying a camera at the end of my senior year of college. And I still have that thing, and it still takes great pictures.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where like, unless you are like just super professional, you know, do you need anything better than what's come out in the last 20 years? No, you really don't.
Yeah. Our old buddy, Tim Brandt, is kind of he's a camera nut. So he always has the latest and greatest, and he does take great pictures. So maybe I'd be curious to see how many people actually have a camera at this point, because I think for most people, camera is now synonymous with their phone. So we'll see. Hop on our Facebook page, answer the question of the week. But we can dive into this week's episode, which is, it's kind of a weird title. When I saw it emailed out, it was just called Nurturing with no context. But we're actually going to be talking about nurturing client relationships this week, which is a huge part of business development. So what would you say is the most important aspect of nurturing a relationship once you've built it?
Man, the most important aspect of nurturing, I would say don't take it for granted. Like, don't take it for granted. Don't take it for granted.
Are you
If you're
saying
the
for granted? What are you, a rock person?
Don't take it for granted if you're a rock person. And if you're not a rock person, don't take it for granted. And basically what I mean is a lot of people assume that the selling process or the biz dev process ends at the close. And the book that I just read, which starts out really good and then quickly tanks after that is called Flip the Funnel. And it's all about basically how he could have summarized this in a chapter rather than a book, is that's really the beginning of the biz dev process, because the power of referrals, the power of upselling, which I learned, I always heard people talking about this and I never knew what they said, what they meant, and just kind of nodded and went along with it because it didn't seem important enough for me to ask what it meant. And so when someone says something in a business contest that you don't understand, you have two choices. You can nod and pretend like you understand it, or you can say, what does that mean? And I'm not embarrassed to say, what does that mean at all? I'm not one of these people. I'm one of those people who I'm not scared to say I don't know what jargon means or industry terminology, but I have to care enough to ask. Like if it's something that I don't really care about, I'm not going to put myself out there and ask, what does that mean? And this was always one of those terms, front end versus back end. And you hear front end versus back end in so many different contexts. It can mean like a million different things. But in this case, you'd always hear, well, we make our money on the back end. We make our money on the back end. And I'm like, okay, cool, man. Sounds awesome. So basically what that means is the front end is that first contract that you sign with a client. The back end is every subsequent contract you sign with that client. Okay. So it's a little bit, again, I bet if you talk to other people, you get different definitions,
right?
But that was the long and short of front end versus back end in terms of sales parlays. And so like most money, and even if you're doing a product, for example, even if you're doing a product like selling apparel like Country Store does, the front end is that initial sale and the back end is every subsequent sale you make to that client over the lifetime of their services. And this is how you get customer lifetime value. So basically the back end value of a client is almost always exponentially more than the front end value of a client. So you don't want to stop the sales process once you sign that original deal. You want to provide good services and make them love you in hopes of creating more value and selling them on that more value during the lifetime of their services.
I was just going to say, it almost seems like nurturing is an offshoot of providing excellent service. So nurturing, you can't nurture a relationship that's soured by either delivering a terrible product or doing a terrible job. So it seems like step one has to be building the relationship first via being a trustworthy company who does a great job.
You know what it's a lot like, and I just thought about this, so there probably is holes in this analogy, but it's like going to see a doctor, right? Like there's two aspects of a doctor. Are they effective, and do they have, for most people, do they have good bedside manner? So like in the first aspect, like just like you said, if you go to a doctor and you're like, I have a cold, and they're like, oh, I'm going to prescribe you something, and then it makes you sicker, there's no way you're going to go back to that doctor, like ever. Or if you go to that doctor and you're like, hey, I have a cold, and he's like, oh, okay, baby, you can't get over a little bit of a cold. Fine, here, go take these pills and you'll feel better. And you take the pills and you feel better. And you're like, man, that doctor's awesome, but he treated me like a piece of crap. I may not go back
right.
to him. You know what I mean? So it's a combination of having both effectiveness and that bedside manner. And that's a good case for nurturing right there.
Hey, we've talked about this a lot before too, in terms of day walkers versus night walkers. It seems like that bedside manner, you really need to determine which folks should be in charge of nurturing the relationship and which folks should be more in charge of the effectiveness side of things.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because we've gone through, as you know, like 2019 is all about like almost creating a robotic nature of the company in terms of processes and action X triggers event Y type thing. And so again, in terms of this nurturing thing, so for example, you have a number of events. So like you sign a new client. What happens when you sign a new client, right? Like it should trigger a number of things. Like you should send them a gift welcoming them as a new client. You should send them like a packet saying what it's like to work with Gunner Technology. All these things trigger when you sign a new client, creating them a new account on our kind of back end system to track all their changes and stuff like that. Like signing a new client should trigger a whole bunch of actions, and creating what those actions are and who actually does them is that separation between day walkers and night walkers. Like the night walkers will create the processes. Like when we sign a new client, this needs to happen, and the day walkers will actually do it. So for example, we had a client, we have a client, and our contact who we worked through for 4 or 5 years, she just retired. So that's an event. That event should trigger actions. Like we sent her a retirement gift, a retirement letter, and also we asked for referrals. So there's a number of events that happen with everything. Is it your client's birthday? Is it your client's son's birthday? Is it Christmas? Like all these different events should trigger reactions. And again, if it involves actually interfacing with the client, you don't want someone who, needs a bib when they go eat, which is me, by the way. I need a bib when I go eat.
I can attest to that. You do.
To be contacting these clients, you want someone who's like a networker, that type A personality, where they like talking to people, they like schmoozing. So yeah, you're exactly right. You definitely need both ends of the spectrum.
And I would say too, for clients listening in who imagine that we're sort of robotically sending them gifts and letters and updates and stuff like that. It's not so much that it's robotic. It's that we have so much on our plates that it's hard to remember everything. So
Yeah,
it's not like you want the process in place to more as a reminder, just to make sure that you do it. But then you have to, the person who does it or the team that does it has to sort of do it from a nurturing sort of position.
Well, it's all about what we learned from our boss at ESPN. Like, operate as though anyone in your organization can get hit by a bus and die tomorrow. Which
he was a morbid guy, but he was exactly
a morbid
right.
guy. But if you operate
But
like
he was,
that,
yeah, completely right.
If you operate like that, it does seem kind of cold, but it's really not. It's like a safeguard against should anything go wrong. We have these processes in place that will actually like make sure that we keep moving without a hitch, kind of thing.
Exactly. In terms of the relationship that you're nurturing, it's constantly changing. So how do you sort of ensure that your strategy for nurturing the relationship is keeping up with the current state of the relationship?
Yeah. So again, this is where you have to have someone who, this is where the non-robotic nature of it comes in. You can't have someone who just basically follows like a weekly check off box kind of thing. Like they actually need to be able to read the relationship and say stuff like, and be able to tell how the relationship is doing and things like that, who can actually like read human emotions and things of that nature. And so basically you have to have like an honest kind of back and forth with the client and know how that relationship's going, both overtly and passively. Like some clients will tell you they're not happy. Some clients will tell you they are happy, but some won't say anything. And you kind of have to be able to read the tea leaves and kind of know, and also ask, like, don't be afraid to ask in terms of like, hey, how do you think things are going? What can we do to be getting better? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? That's an important thing to actually ask and follow through on.
Yeah, it's always about growing and strengthening a relationship for sure. And actually, we got a happy Valentine's Day on Facebook. So I didn't even realize this is the most appropriate episode for February 14th, nurturing relationships. It matters in life, it matters in business. I was going to ask in terms of, because there is sort of obviously there's a foremost goal of nurturing a relationship because you want your clients to be happy. You want sort of the relationship to be, like I said, as strong as possible. How do you sort of broach the subject of those referrals that you're talking about, that additional business getting, recommended to other companies? What's the best way to sort of tactfully go about that?
Well, actually, I don't think you have to be. I mean, I don't think it's as delicate as people think. Like the way I handle it is just be very upfront. Is be like, and and be very frequent about it. Hey, it helps us out a great deal when we find when clients send us referrals. So if you know of anyone who you think we could help, please send them our way. Don't worry about it being a bad referral, meaning that it's not a good fit. I'll figure that out. Just send us anyone who you think could benefit from our services. So I'm very upfront about it. And again, I pitch it as, which they are, you're doing us a favor. Please do us a favor. Because people like helping other people out. And sometimes we get in this mindset where we think that like a referral is going to be like kind of like a hindrance almost, like, oh, Gunner Technology, that they're doing just fine. They don't need me to send some guy who may or may not be a fit for them, and bog them down. Like sometimes that's the perception. And so I kind of try to overcome that by saying frequently, please send us a referral whenever you think it might be a good fit, or whenever you think there might be a potential fit there.
It's
And
probably
also,
easier too for service companies like ours because we're working with entrepreneurs and small businesses who are businessmen themselves, and they're focused on growth. They're focused on getting referrals themselves. So it's probably not completely foreign to them to be asked to do us a favor and maybe, recommend us to someone that they might have in mind, right?
yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And the thing is like, it is the lifeblood of what you're doing. And so, yeah, some referrals aren't going to work out. But let's say 1 out of 5 do. You've got to keep that going. You've got to keep that, expand that. Again, that's what the whole flip the funnel was about, is that you really branch off of the funnel, opens up backward and down, because the more referrals you get, the more clients you get, the more referrals you should get. And it should be self-feeding the funnel. So that's it's critical. And the other thing is you should let them know, again, if you're asking for referrals, like throw out examples of what you've done recently, in terms of like, because sometimes, again, especially in our industry, the client gets so locked in on what we're doing for them specifically, they may not know that we do things for other industries.
Right,
My
right.
point is like, if you say, hey, just want to let you know, we just finished this app in the biomedical industry that monitors people's heart rate and sends an alert to a loved one if the heart rate gets too high. So if you can think of any use cases for stuff like that in another someone let us know. And they're like, oh, wow, you can do that? You work in biomedical? I actually know a buddy who just started a biomedical firm. Let me put you in contact with him. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to be upfront again about what you can do. And again, then ask if the client knows anyone who could use those services or anything like that.
Just keeping an eye out for serendipitous situations.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
any concluding thoughts on nurturing relationships, whether
Uh,
business or otherwise?
Yeah. Again, I think honesty and process is just really big. Again, you're trying to make the client. You're trying to make sure the client feels like they're your most important client at all times. And the bottom line is that's what you should. By definition, not every client can be your most important client, but as a company, you should strive to make sure that client is your most important client. It's like the whole joke about like, if practice makes perfect, but no one's perfect, why practice, kind of thing.
Right, right.
It's the same thing. And for the people who are assigned that client, they should be their most important client. So you basically just treat the relationship like that. And by the way, being your most important client doesn't mean that that you say yes to everything or you let them walk over you. That's where the honesty comes in.
Exactly.
And you have to have it like a very solid relationship where you can speak honestly and say that's a bad idea, or no, that wasn't part of the original spec. We can't just, if we do that, we're going to miss our deadline or whatever. You have to have that open and honest relationship, which sometimes seems like it can get contentious, but if you're on solid ground, then that's more of a time saver where you can cut to the chase and be honest with each other than kind of beat around the bush and let the relationship slowly sour.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's a great place to leave it. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Again, a happy Valentine's Day to all of our viewers, especially Daryl on Facebook, who wished us a happy Valentine's Day. And as a bit of an aside, our social media manager Carrie is going to be starting a new adventure with Rogue Gaming as their content coordinator. So congratulations to her on that. We wish her all the best. And if you guys like the updated look and feel of our channel, she's pretty much wholly responsible for that. Yeah, good luck, Carrie. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Make sure to tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time for next week's episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. You can check out the blog post for this episode at gunnertech.com. The podcast will be available on iTunes. Our ebooks are available on Barnes & Noble, iBooks, Amazon Kobo, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. Hop on our Facebook page and sign up for the Country Store giveaway. Country Store is a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. You can visit them at countrystoreoutfitters.com. And while you're there, answer our question of the week, which this week is, do you own a camera? Like a camera, like a real camera, not like the camera on your phone. So hop on our Facebook page, answer that question, and tune in next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time for the next episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I'm Derry. That's Cody. We'll see you next week.